Hi, I'm Rory Davies from Training Together. I deliver a number of pet-orientated first aid courses, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to bandage a tail in an emergency situation. There is no right or wrong answer, I think, as long as we do the main thing, and that's stop the bleed, because that in an emergency is the important thing. We stop the bleed and we keep out infection for long-term recovery. So, a lot of vessels in the tail, a lot of blood everywhere. The minute you try and call your dog over, the tail tends to wag. So that blood then ends up all over everything. So what we need to do is try and keep your dog as still as possible. I know that's easier said than done sometimes, but let's try and restrain our pet if possible. Bear in mind, when you are dealing with a pet in emergencies, you do have the bite reflex. So your pet, as timid as it usually is, may in this instance react out of character and bite you. So always be prepared for that. If possible, use a muzzle unless you're absolutely sure that you're not going to get bitten by your pet. So initially we need to have a look at the wound. If you find a penetrating object, be it a stick through the tail or something from inside coming out, leave it as it is. Don't try and take it out, and don't try and push it further in. What it could be resting on a vessel, could be resting on anything inside there, and that in itself could be stopping the bleeding or minimizing it. If you do take it out, it'll just bleed more, and also you could cause further damage. So leave it until you get to your vet. Your vet will then take the appropriate steps to perhaps x-ray, see where that penetrating object is, and then remove it if it's safe to do so. So if you've inspected the wound and you do find little cartilage in there, we want to perhaps splint it as well. Ideal thing is to perhaps prepare something like this for the size of your dog's tail. So we'd put that round there and we'd squeeze that, and that would offer a nice lot of pressure to the entire tail, keeping it nice and straight, and then we can bandage around that. So before we do that, just check the wound and ascertain what steps you're going to take after that. Usually in this case, we're going to go to the vet. This is going to be an emergency procedure, not long term. The vet can make it all nice and pretty for us. The vet can put vet wrap on that'll match your dog's behavior. But for today, we're going to be just making sure that we stop that bleeding and get the pet to the vet without dying. Okay, so we could use this, stick that round there, and then we could grab one of our bandages that you can either get from a pet first aid kit that you may be prepared before, bought at many pet suppliers. A lot of it could be human first aid material. This is a pressure bandage. Pressure bandage has a short bit of bandage, a long bit of bandage, and then a square gauze sewn into the bandage. This is where you would either want to place on the wound directly if you didn't want to use one of those directly like that, or we could just use that around where the wound would be. What we want to achieve by bandaging, we want to cover all sides of the bandage, of that gauze. We want to seal the bottom and we want to seal the top. And the reason we want to seal around the top and bottom of that gauze is to keep infection out and blood in. We're going to stop that bleeding. The blood will help offer pressure and coagulate to seal off any wound. Okay, and then we want to go over almost in a figure of 8 where the wound would be underneath this bit of material or directly on the gauze itself, just offering that pressure. So we've checked the wound, we've applied pressure, and usually we'd elevate depending on the pet. We don't want to walk into a vet with the pet upside down, but if it is bleeding profusely, then we could do so. Another thing to remember, if direct pressure isn't working, so we tie off opposite side of the wound, which will be this side in this case. The wound is this side, the knot is now this side. We'd apply pressure. If that's not working, we could always look at applying indirect pressure. The wound being here, we can apply indirect pressure lower down, and that would reduce the blood flow. We don't want to cut it off, we just want to reduce the blood flow with indirect pressure. Okay, there's many other ways you can do. This is working fine, but the minute whiskey starts wagging its tail, is that going to come off very easily. The other thing we could do is apply pressure to the body. So we could bend the tail down and wrap around the back of the body. But bear in mind, this may cause other behavioral changes. This might be where the animal balances just before the back legs. We tie something tight around there, dog will fall over. Okay, so bear that in mind, you might create another problem. The other way, we could put it down one leg and apply pressure against the leg. So, number of ways we can do it, no right or wrong in an emergency situation. How much pressure do you apply to a tail? If we are bandaging to the body, we don't want to apply much pressure, it will obstruct perhaps breathing. To the leg, we could, if we offer too much pressure, we could cut off circulation. What we're looking for in humans, if you put a bandage on, you'd usually check the area past the bandage to see colour of the skin and any swelling, and we can also ask a human being, does that feel too tight? Is it throbbing? We can't do that with pets, so we have to use common sense. If it stops the bleeding, we know it's tight enough, and if we can tell skin colour, then try and look to see what's happening past that stage. We don't want to create a tourniquet which will restrict the blood flow and cause death to the tissue past the obstruction. You might want to wear gloves. The reason you'd be wearing gloves is mainly to keep infection out of the wound, so your hands might not be 100% clean. And also, we want to put a bit of antiseptic on there. That would be the natural instinct, but of course when you get to the vet's going to want to see the wound, so they're going to have to get that off. It may make things a bit more difficult. Remember, we're dealing with an emergency situation, and the emergency is to stop the bleeding, not to promote recovery at this stage and keep out infection. Get the pet to the vet will be able to clean that with the correct materials and antiseptic, and then clean it up and set you on your way. The other thing you do ask, if you do have a pet with a longer tail, nice long hair, you may want to snip the hair, but again, in an emergency situation, the bandage will curl that all up. Yes, it'll be difficult if the blood coagulates that hair, but the vet will be able to rinse that off, loosen the hair, and maybe even shear if possible with clippers. So again, emergency situation. If you weren't visiting a vet, you would obviously take all that into account and put some antiseptic on and cut the hair away and make a nice, neat, long-term solution. So always nice to use a pressure bandage when we're bandaging to keep infection out and to offer pressure, hence the pressure bandage term. But sometimes we don't have a full first aid kit. Sometimes we walk out the house with a lead and a couple of poo bags, and that's all we have. So when we're out in the woods, we get a bleed, we don't have that pressure bandage with us. We can always use a nappy sack, or we can tear off a bit of clothing, a sock or finger of a glove over a tail, and use that as a makeshift bandage. If you want to know any more about bandaging your dog, then please look out for qualified trainers, those people registered with awarding bodies, those people that know what they're talking about, so that we don't have any mistakes and you end up using the vet when you need one.